So I'm out today. I'm going to start sampling for mites. Right about this time of year, last week in August, we're drifting out of summer, we're approaching fall. These nests are starting to prepare themselves for winter. So we have to be really vigilant on not only providing these hives with enough nutrition to be able to develop an adequate nest, but focus on disease control. And the main point there is the Varroa mite. The Varroa mite is our biggest concern in the fall. They carry, they're just riddled with virus, which they carry into the bees and make the hive sick and kill them off. So our job as beekeepers at this time of year is to control the Varroa mite. And to do that, we got to know how many mites there are in our hives, and we work on thresholds. So what I do is my springtime, summertime threshold throughout the year is 1%. I want my hives with my mite counts under 1%. As we approach into fall, my threshold increases a little bit because our nest in the fall time is starting to shrink because that queen's reduced her laying. We're focusing on that winter nest. So we'll have a smaller brood nest for those mites to hide in. So as that winter brood nest hatches out through fall into winter, we're going to get an increase in mite counts within our colonies. So we can expect an increase of our mite counts. This is really important to acknowledge this. About this time of year, I want about that 1% or so. As we drift into fall, our mite counts are going to increase, and we're going to recognize that I want my mite counts to remain under a certain threshold number, which for me is under 2.5%. When I first started beekeeping, my threshold within September, October was 5%. But since we seem to be influenced with more viral infections now that ride on the mite into the bees, I've had to lower that number down to be able to get my hives through winter properly. So I use a 2.5% mite count. It is very important that we watch and monitor our hives for Varroa levels. If we have a high Varroa count within our colonies through the summer, as those colonies drift into fall and that the queen restricts her laying and they're preparing that nest for winter, there isn't going to be as many bees to switch out that colony. There's going to be an increase in mites per bee, which increases the exposure of that hive to viral infections. And if that colony has too many mites in it, which influences that colony with too much viral infection, you're going to get a massive colony crash. And this is what you hear in the fall about colonies crashing. They die just because the disease overwhelms the colony, mostly because the mites overwhelm the bees with virus. So take that in a little bit, and we have to acknowledge this. So we have to track our colonies from middle to late summer throughout into fall to be able to determine what's going on in that colony disease-wise. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple ways of sampling our hives to determine these counts. One of the ways I get from Randy Oliver, he pulls frames from the brood nest, identifies the young bees, and takes a sample per colony. What I do, I manage in single box management here. My method isn't probably as precise, but what I'm doing is I'm tipping back my colonies. I'm taking a sample of bees as close to that brood nest as I possibly can, get as many young bees as I can. The young bees is typically where the Varroa mite's going to be lingering. It's going to be hanging on. So that gives me my count. What I do is I take about 6 colonies per yard, and I find my averages. Okay. I look at my operational average, and then I determine whether or not I need to do a treatment throughout my whole apiary or not. And that's what I do. For you bigger guys, I know you guys are all monitoring your mites and keeping a close eye on things because we're all experienced at this. You send out one of your best trained guys to the yards, find those numbers for you. I'm sure you're all doing that. For you hobby types, it is really good practice just to, when you're going out there, just to know what it is. Just take a little sample of bees see what your count is, and then you can exercise the proper steps needed to be able to control the infection within that colony, whichever way you choose. The guys that I'm really focusing on right now are the sideline, the smaller type beekeeper who's growing, like they say, 50 hives up to 200, 300, 400 hives. You guys are a growing business. Typically, you guys have a job on the side. You guys are really busy. I've been through all these steps too. I know exactly what it's like. We have time restraints, not enough time in the day. We got all this honey to extract or strip the honey off, and then we forget about the hives a little bit until we get into September, October. Then we realize there's problems. So I just want to reinforce the importance of getting out to your apiary, now, and taking that sample and knowing where your colonies are at. We have to get a starting point somewhere here. This is our starting point, and then we can create a plan moving forward from now. If there's one thing that you can do to help your colony stay alive, is to start monitoring mites right now and then develop some kind of a plan. So I'm really targeting you sideline guys, because you guys are at the biggest risk right now for not physically having enough time to be able to do all these steps and procedures. So I just want to reinforce that this step is just as important as feeding your colonies protein or sugar, or putting a new queen into that colony to create that fantastic nest. This is probably one of the more important steps, is monitoring your apiary to be able to get a handle on knowing what your disease levels are. If your disease levels are too high, all the rest of the work is for naught. So here we are in the bee yard, and here I've identified I'm going to sample this colony here. I forgot my smoke today. We'll just go without it. But what I got here is rubbing alcohol. Okay. I have this cheap little Tupperware tub. That's what I'm going to dump my bees into. A little scoop, a little measuring scoop, and my mite shaker. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rubbing alcohol, and this is what dislodges the mites off the bees. It's very important, so I put a little bit in there. And we can reuse this. This is expensive stuff, but we're going to reuse this throughout our sampling, through our yards. Now this tub, what we're going to use this for is we're going to tap the bees into this tub, and we're going to separate out the young bees within our sample. And I'm going to show you what that's all about, and just a little scoop to measure out the bees. Okay, so we're going to go down into the colony, and I want to identify the young bees, but I don't want to grab the queens, because we're just defeating the purpose if we kill off the queen, right? So I'm going to go after a frame close to the brood nest. A frame of brood. I've been feeding this yard, so there's syrup in here and pollen. I'm just doing a quick look for the queen, because I don't want to sample the queen. I don't see her. Okay, I guess just do a quick little tap. I don't need many bees in there. So what's going to go on inside this tub right now is I've dumped my bees in, and the forager bees, the older bees, will fly off. And what's going to be left is with the nurse bees. Okay, so I got to grab my sample here. Just going to scoop up the bees into my little measuring cup and dump them in. This is my mite shaker. It's got a leaking gasket here. So I want to shake these guys roughly for about, I don't know, a minute or so. And what's going to happen is the rubbing alcohol is going to dislodge the mites that are on the bees. The rubbing alcohol instantly kills the bees and kills the mites. And what we want to achieve here is just getting the mites off the bees. As we shake, 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 shake. And then I just want to swish the bees down into the bottom to get my mite count. And When I look underneath here to take a look at my mites, I don't see any mite counts in here, but you'll be able to count your mites in the bottom of this little shaker. So in regards to field testing, about one scoop like this is roughly 150 to 200 bees. So let's say about 200 bees or so if you take a good scoop. So you're going to be counting your mites over 200. So you want to find your percentage that way. So if I'm counting 2 mites in the bottom here, if we roughly calculate 200 bees into this container, you're looking at 1% mite infestation. What I do is I take my bees and my mites and I put them all back into one container. I take my sampling through my whole yard, and then I count my mites and I weigh out 100 bees, and then I figure out how many bees I have in that sample, and then I get a hard number that way. And that's how I determine my apiary mite infestation. Another way I go about mite sampling within my yard, I do things a little bit quicker. So what I do is I tip these colonies back, and you have to understand that all my hives are in single boxes, so I can easily tip my colonies back to expose the nest. I'm assuming my brood nest is within this region here, right down to the bottom. So by taking a sample right down to the bottom underneath that cluster, I'm assuming I'm collecting a lot of young bees because that brood nest is right there. So what I do is I go through my yard, I pick 6, I tip back 6, and I use a little sucking device here. It's what I call a bee sucker. Randy Oliver shows how to make a little device like this on his website, scientificbeekeeping.com. He uses it to sample for nosema. I use it to sample for mites. So I basically just tip my colony back. And I just take a nice little sample of bees from each colony. So I'll take a sample from about 6 within the yard, not a large sample, and I'll get a sample of about 200, 500 bees, and then I determine my mite infestation that way. I might have more of a chance of sucking up the queen this way, but I'm assuming when I tip that colony back, that queen's going to see the light and she's going to move up. So then I basically, after I'm done taking my samples, I basically just do the same thing. I just shake up the sample like this. And then look for my mite counts. And there's none in there. So I'm just going to go and take a sample, about 6 colonies through this yard, and I want to see, and we'll see whereabouts my mite counts are at in this yard. I use this bee sucker, but it's maybe to be just as quick if, you know, just scoop them off the bottom like that. I've sampled 6 colonies here. This is my 6th colony. That's including the one that's including this one where I pulled the frame to gather bees off, to showing you how to sample bees, just tapping them into the tub, isolating the young bees and such, just showing you a couple different ways that I do it. A lot of people argue that just pull the frame and shake the bees and count the mites, and they're absolutely right. But beekeepers have a bad habit of not following through with plans that they have, and maybe pulling that frame is just a little bit too much work for them, and they just keep postponing and just keep putting off the work. I find using this bee sucker and having it in the truck And you know, before I pull the yard, I'm like, oh yeah, I should sample that yard. So I have a guy just tip back the colony, boom, 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 boom. We test 6 colonies, we get our sample, and then we're following through with the whole program. So I'm just looking here at one mite. Here's one mite. Oh, it's not a mite. It's a small little beetle. So this yard, I've shaken like there'd be roughly 250, 300 bees in there. I'll weigh them out and I'll get my exact number later on. But I'm not counting any mites in this yard, so I can rest assured if I found 1 or 2 or 3 mites in here that represent around 1%. So I got to be very aware. There's my starting point. So I'm finding 5 or 6 or 10 in here already. We have to, at this point, right now, get in here and start treating for those mites to get it under control, because right now is the critical time. Right now is when they're starting to build that winter nest, and we got to make these bees as healthy as we possibly can. So we got to kill off those mites to decrease the exposure of the viral infections to this wintering colony. So right now in this yard, I would say I can rest easy. What my plans are, if you guys are wondering what I plan on doing, I'm hoping that my whole apiary falls under the 1% mite infestation, so that I can just rest easy throughout the fall and build a good winter nest. And late fall, just before I put these guys into winter, we have no brood in this colony now. Let's say about end of October into November. Most of the broods hatched out, so all those mites, if there's going to be any mites in here, will be exposed on the bees. We go through with an oxalic acid vaporized treatment just to catch all those mites and purge the colonies. And that's been working very well for me for the last couple years. This will be my 3rd year using oxalic acid vapor just in the fall. It adds that rotation, so I also treat with Apivar in the spring. So with the Apivar in the spring catches mites, and then a different treatment late in the fall catches a whole different spectrum of mites. So it just helps rotate my treatments and keeps my colonies clean. And then when that happens, then you get big boxes of bees like this, which looks absolutely fantastic. So these guys are going to get busy. They're going to make my winter nest, and everything should be just dandy. Wish I remembered my smoke. It's always easier to work with bees with smoke. I use smoke as my whip. Just kind of, you know, moves the bees, if anything. Keeps the yard calm. Keeps the hive calm, but also keeps the yard calm by using smoke, and masks that alarms pheromones so it doesn't start wafting all over the place. But it also helps move bees out of your way, so you're not always squishing bees, and helps you work with them a little bit. So to follow through with some more of my fall-time disease monitoring strategies, what I do is I'm also, when I'm taking my sampling, like the bees in my sample here, so the bees in my sample here I collect and I put into a pail. And the reason I do that is because what I want to know further than just the Varroa mites, I want to know my nosema counts. So what I'll be doing is I'll be looking under the microscope using the sequential sampling technique that Randy Oliver developed. And I'll be sending a sample away to the National Bee Diagnostic Center in Beaver Lodge, Alberta, Canada, just to give me a quantitative count on my nosema levels and such. Also, they've also developed a technique on American foulbrood screening. What you do is you send them a sample of bees and they grind them up or whatever, and they give you a level of American foulbrood spores within your sample. And they've developed a metric, so you know, the amount of spores in your bee sample can be on the low to safe range, medium, all the way up to high to caution. So we don't necessarily have to see the visible vegetative state of American foulbrood within our nest to identify it. We can take a sample of bees and have the spore count numbers within the bees themselves express the severity of infection that just resides in the background levels within our colonies. I think that's just a real cool diagnostic tool. I haven't treated my hives with oxytetracycline for, I forget how many years now. It's got to be at least 5. I'm very heavy on my surveillance, And a tool like this, where I can take just a sample of my bees throughout my whole apiary and know what my American fall brood levels are, because these are honeybees. There's always a background exposure to American fall brood, no matter what we do or what we try to do. It's just, is that American fall brood expressing itself? And I think beekeepers have to realize that, like American fall brood is, a beekeeper will get it, you know, they feel like they could put on a blacklist, and it's not that. It's just the importance of, ouch, damn wasp. Ooh, wasps stings are the worst. It's not, we can't blacklist people for finding American fall brood within their equipment and within their bees. We have to be able to identify the situation and then manage it. And if there's an operation within an area that has an outbreak of American fall brood, we have to be sure that they're putting attention toward, controlling the situation, managing the situation, and then at the same time, beekeepers all around need to be aware of the situation as well, so then we can up our surveillance and take precautions to be able to prevent that infection from spreading. That's just what I believe. I haven't seen American fall brood for, I've seen it once 15 years ago when I bought equipment and bees into my operation, and the provincial inspector helped me identify at that time. So it was very important to identify the infection and deal with it. And because I dealt with it, I haven't seen it again. Anyways, this is just a neat little diagnostic tool in our toolkit. I think we should all participate in. Not only do I take a generalized sample from my whole apiary, but I'll also take samples from yards close to neighbors just to see if there's any increased infection in those yards, maybe being spread in from neighboring colonies. Another diagnostic tool I use is I gather, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to be doing it in the next couple of weeks. I gather a live sample of bees and I send it off to the National Bee Diagnostic Center in Beaver Lodge to do a viral detection and quantitative analysis. So they'll tell me the viruses, the viral loads within my bees, and they'll tell me the level, like the copies per bee gene, just to try to give you a quantitative feeling and how bad that viral infection is within your colonies. So that's a real neat diagnostic tool. It costs a few $100, but I think it's worth it, knowing what viral infections we have within our bee stock. So there's just a few thoughts on bee diseases, and just a couple of techniques on how to sample your apiary to determine your mite counts. And I hope all of you adopt and use it.